Hi, this is my Sony A7R. It's 36 megapixels, and on it is the Zeiss, or the Sony FE 16 to 35 millimeter f4 lens. So this is no slouch of a system. It's probably almost as high end as you can get in shooting a wide angle. And 16 millimeter is just at the edge of where it becomes very fisheye. Yet many times I want to photograph a scene where I want to get in a lot more than the angle that 60 millimeters will give me, and then I want to straighten it in Photoshop to give a certain type of effect, and I can't get it with this camera. And although I could get a fisheye, then you run into so many, or I run into so many optical issues. I just can't get the image I want. So I developed a gadget for my Ricoh GR that will allow me to take multiple images, photographs, and then stitch them together, and then be able to crop into whatever image I want, the composition-wise, while retaining the resolution of that I could get with this camera. In fact, sometimes more resolution. In fact, definitely more resolution if you think about it in a certain way. The other benefit is this camera is 2.5 pounds right here. This whole thing is under a pound. It's like, I don't know, 10 ounces or something like that. And I carry my Ricoh GR with me everywhere. So essentially, the Ricoh GR, it does everything I want it to do for 28 millimeter. Even if I didn't even bother getting, I had a 28 millimeter for this, I don't even use it anymore because I get everything I want in this, even though it's 16 megapixels, plenty enough for me. So everything at 28 millimeters, this is a camera I'll always use no matter what, even if I had a 28 millimeter for this. So with this edition, I can now get from 28 down to anything, essentially, down to 5 millimeter image with high resolution that I can compose in any way that I want. And most stuff I shoot isn't 28 millimeters. So the only time I'd really want to bring another camera, another lens, is if I know I'm going to do portraits. Or group shots with the 55 millimeter or something like that. So now I'm going to show you some images of why this gadget I built is very useful. And so this building I was walking by, and it looks like this would be a good case for a good test. And I also have the Sony 16 to 35 millimeter lens for the A7R to do comparison shots with. Here's a shot I took with the Sony A7R and the 16 to 35, and this is a 16 millimeter, so this is as wide as I can get. And then here's 15 shots I took with the Ricoh GR on my little DigiTiler P stitched together to form this shot. And then ultimately I took this shot and I cropped in to get this image, which is what I like of this. Now, it isn't a great photograph, but this should illustrate what we're getting at. Now, normally, if you shoot with a very wide-angle lens, if I'd shot in this with, let's say, an 8 millimeter, I would have lost a lot of resolution. So let's look at the high-resolution Sony camera. Again, this is probably as high resolution as you're going to get. Let's look at this fan, right? So just right now, it's starting to pixelate for me. So this is just before it starts to pixelate. And now let's look at the stitched image and zoom in. Okay, so that's just before it starts to pixelate. So high resolution, the Ricoh GR stitch. As you can see, it has as much resolution as a 36 megapixel camera, even though the 16 megapixel image is stitched together. I was going to go to Staples for a really cheap SD card. They didn't have one. The cheapest was $50. Go figure. But I was walking. I like the way this building is very straight. So it'll make a good perspective type a partial pano. I'm not going to take you through how I stitched these images together. So I'm using Microsoft Image Composite Editor, which is an amazing piece of software. It's freeware. Microsoft has unfortunately stopped developing it a couple of years ago, but believe it or not, it's still the best thing out there for this type of thing, at least I find. There are other pieces of Other software out there is still being developed, which are very good, have their own benefits, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, this is using Microsoft ICE for image composite editor, and it's available for Windows only. Sorry, Mac people. So I'm going to start a new panorama, and it's going to ask me to go to the images that I want to stitch. So those images of the staples are right here. So it's these 15 images. So I'm going to select these 15 images. I'm going to open them, and I can actually set the camera motion, which is actually what makes this particular software so powerful. And that's for another day. But for now, we're just going to do simple panorama. In other words, we're going to let it figure out, how the images all go together, because it works very well. I don't need to do the manual method. Though when you need it, it's a godsend. Okay, so it's aligning the images and compositing the images, and this is what it comes up with. Now, how you project the image, you can project it in different ways because again, how light reaches us, there's no fact to it. Even in our eyes, it's curved. Our brain straightens things out to how it wants to look at. So we could say cylindrical, which is generally the vertical lines are straight. Transverse cylindrical, where the horizontal lines are straight, but you can see the verticals are sort of curved. And this isn't, again, this is art. This is, you decide what you want to do. And it's another reason why I invented this thing, because I want to get at different images, and I need a lot of the image there, a lot of image basically to bend and pull and fit it into the story that I want to tell. Here's Mercator, transverse, spherical, and again, I should know more about what these are exactly: fisheye, stereographic, and perspective. As I said in that video, I felt this was going to make a good perspective pano. So I'm going to pick that projection, though again, I could pick any of these. I could do multiple photos. I'm going to say next, and now it's going to project the panorama. There's a lot to how this stitching happens, which I'd love to get into, but then I'll drag this video into like an hour. I'm going to back out because I want to crop it. And now, when you do the perspective projection, you can see it elongates things on the side. And I probably should have pulled this down a little bit. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to leave it like this. I'm going to go next. Now, see here, it's 329 megapixels. Way beyond the 16 megapixels of the Ricoh GR. Way beyond. This is 10 times more resolution than the Sony A7R. So in effect, my little gadget has turned my GR into a large format camera. This is large format resolution. Even medium format resolution generally tops out at about 100 megapixels. Again, one of the huge benefits of this type of photography. So I'll do export to disk. Actually, let me just save this as do superb. So I really can't tell much of a difference. Okay, so I'm going to export this to the disk, and I'm just going to call this like an A test. Okay, now I'm going to open Photoshop, and let's close out of these things we're already in. This was in here. So I'm going to open the image, and again, this is very high resolution. As you can see, this is 18,000 by 18,000 pixels. And just do a quick image auto color. As you can see, it takes a while because the image is so large. And for this one, I'd probably just want to do a 16 by 9 crop. So I guess I'll leave that truck. I like that woman in there. I'll leave the. I don't want to do this. I think I do want that, as much of that truck as I can get. And there you have it. I mean, this is an image you just simply cannot get. I find with any sort of camera and lens. I think I took an A7R of that thing when I was there. So let's see what the A7R is. Yeah, so here's one. Let's take this one, open with Photoshop. Just do an auto here, auto here. So so this is the maximum amount of image I can get with the Sony 16mm. So look at this story, and then look at this story. I love this story. This story is sort of how I see this particular thing of stores. Now, this path isn't wide, obviously, but generally I see this much. I sort of think about this much. I don't see in this way, even though this is right. So, again, difference between the DigiTiler P for Ricoh GR, the kind of image you can get, and the Sony with the 16 to 35. And while I'm at it, I might as well just show you some other images I took. Yeah, so here's a gallery shot that I took. I'm sorry, a Harvard alley shot that I took using the, and again, just getting closely come to doing that with the, you didn't need a fisheye and then a lot of straightening, and then you wouldn't get, right, you're not going to get the kind of resolution here with any sort of camera and lens combination. Wide angle lenses, fisheye lenses, they're huge because they're actually sort of like telephoto lenses in reverse. I forget the optical reasons, but they can't just make them really small. So it's a lot of stuff to carry around with you. So I thought, okay, if I just take like 3, images with the Ricoh GR, I can stitch them together to be basically any sort of angle of lens that I want. And I get all the sharpness from this. And of course, when you're putting multiple images together, your resolution is getting higher and higher. So even if you take 3 images of this, say the sensor is basically 4,000 by 4,000 pixels, it's 16 megapixel camera. So if you take 3 times 4 on one side, that's 12 times 4. You're talking about a 50 megapixel image. You're not talking about like a medium format image from this thing. But you don't want to use, at least I don't want to use, a panel head. Now these things are very sophisticated. They have tons of, things that you can set them on to get the angle of the lens and this and that. But they're very heavy and they're very bulky. And I don't want to take a 360. I don't want to use any camera on it. I just want to use this camera. So I want to create something sort of like these, but by essentially creating something that's only geared towards my specific camera, I can make it really light and for me very useful and easy to take around. So here's a DigiTiler P GR. I call it. This is the one that you can take apart. But actually, let me show you the one that's actually just all one fixed piece. So the way it works is it's just how I hold this thing to hold the lens in. Is the camera would go here, and I'll show you. So the camera goes onto my DigiTiler P. And this only weighs a few ounces, by the way. So it's, you put it in your bag, you're not going to notice it. And what I've done is I've already figured out, 30% overlap for each image, and it's all here. So I don't have to think about it. I just have to go to this end, shot, middle shot, end shot. And you see how it stops here at the ends? So again, when I'm going back and forth, I don't have to think about 1, 2, 3. I'm done, and I can take 3 shots, which are close to, I need to measure, but it's probably 120 degrees. It's like an 8mm type lens thing. And then on the multiple shots vertically, I basically have these little use a bearing to basically make a stop, so that when I go up and down 30%, again, I don't have to calibrate this. I don't have to think about it. This is already designed for this camera. I put it on when I do this, go up and down, I'm getting 30% overlap. And not only that, but I can either do, panels going this way and up and down, or I can flip it like this. There's a tripod mount right here, and I can do it like this. I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever I want, just this way, and then that's very easy to stitch together like a 16:9 nice wide angle image.